France and England. And yeah, looking forward to it. Should be interesting. Oh, see you, Ian. Yeah, do you want the light stand?
Yeah, just a touch. Yeah, good evening everyone, and thanks for coming along on a cold and frosty night. I tried not to make this an advert for the French tourism office. I'm actually going to talk about contesting and my story in contesting, and why it can become an addiction, and you may see the theme of addiction coming through in some of these slides, so I apologise for that. Just to talk a little bit what I'm actually going to talk about, and the two pictures there are my two QSL cards. The pictures are both taken from the front gate of my house in England and my house in France, and you see they're a little bit different, but both equally attractive, I think. So just to run through a couple of things I'm going to talk about. I thought, because a lot of you don't know me, because I've not been coming to the club regularly for the last couple of years, because I got stuck in France because of COVID and other things. I thought I'd just run through who I am and where I've come from, as it were. I want to talk about why contesting, what I've done about contesting in Wiltshire in the past, because that's where it's all started. Why France? How I found the QTH in France, making a start over there, setting up a shack, antennas, what contests, propagation, bit about how contesting has actually got me involved in other things involved in radio, which has been a great experience in my radio activity, and also what I'm still planning to do in the future. So those are some of the things. Just a bit about me then to start with. And you'll see this QSL up here is my original QSL card from when I first got my licence. And you'll see I got my licence on the 1st of January 1969. And some of you may be thinking, well, how the bloody hell did you do that on the 1st of January? Well, the answer is it wasn't a bank holiday in 1969. And we had post. And so my licence was dated the 1st of January. And I was 15, and I took the RE when I was 14. And in those days, you could only get either a Class A or a Class B licence. And the difference was you had to do the Morse test to get the Class A licence. Now, I was lucky because my father was a radio operator in the Navy in the war. So he taught me Morse on an electronic organ, which he played in the front room of our house. So that's how I learnt Morse. And we used to send Morse to each other over the dining table. The other thing you'll notice is that I come from Warrington. Warrington is now in Cheshire, but actually in 1969 it was in Lancashire. So I still consider myself to be a Lancashire lad, actually. The next card is actually from the university I went to. I went to the University of Manchester Institute of Science and Technology, short name UMIST, which has now been absorbed back into the main university. And it was only when I looked at recent CQ Worldwide, I was scanning the CQ Worldwide site for contest results, that I realised I took part in an HF contest in 1972 at university, and it was a CQ Worldwide multi-SSB contest. So I guess that was probably the first contest I ever did, which was a bit of a baptism of fire. But I remember a KW 2000A and a big linear sat in the corner with a couple of 813s.
I like the postcode because there's a nice call sign there.
Yeah.
M60, M60.
Yeah, and it used GB3MAN, which is not a contest call you'd think of using at all these days. So my first experience of contesting on 2 meters was when I first started work, and I lived in a place called Uttoxeter in Staffordshire, and I joined the North Staffordshire Amateur Radio Society, and we used to go contesting in the Derbyshire Hills. And I remember doing a 2 meter contest for a place called Merriton Low, one of the highest places in the Derbyshire Peak District. And we did 2,400 QSOs in 24 hours on 2 meter SSB. You would never in your wildest dreams do that. That just shows you how much activity there was there. It was tremendous. You might get blown away as well up there. I moved to Purton for job reasons in 1987. so quite a long time ago. I joined the Swindon Club in 1988. I think looking around the room, there aren't many people here tonight who were here in 1988. So quite a long time ago. I was actually chairman of the club in the 1990s, some of you may remember, and we actually started up contesting again in the 90s, starting going up to Barbary Castle at weekends, and got the club quite keen. I also started HF contesting in Purton in the 1990s, really to increase my DXCC score. I didn't think I stood a cat and hell's chance of winning any contest, but I did it just to increase my country score on the HF bands, and that worked because I'm at 324 confirmed now, so I need 6 more to get on the honour roll. My wife and I decided to buy a house in France in 2004. We did that for a couple of reasons. We'd always liked going on holiday in France and liked the culture and the feel of France. And that was actually made redundant just before that. And and I was lucky enough to get another job, so I didn't actually need the redundancy money. So I said, rather than waste it and blow it away on brand new radios and things like that, why don't we blow it on a house in France? So that's what we did.
And then get the radios.
And then get the radio. Yeah. But I didn't tell her that at the time. I got F5EKT in 2005, and some of you might say, well, why did you do that? Because at this stage it was only a holiday house. You can use the CEPT license regulations to use your own call with F stroke in front of it, but you're only allowed to do that for 3 months. So if you're there more than 3 months, you need to get a local call. I really got serious in contesting, I guess, from about 2006, partly because of people I was meeting who were interested. And I was coming up to retirement, I was winding down a bit. I actually retired in 2008, and you'll see from that time on my contesting activity increased quite a bit. I got G3Y as a contest call in 2011, and you'll hear that occasionally on from over here. And I got TM5T for France, which is a French contest call, in 2017. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. Also, background: I'm a committee member of CDXC, which is the UK HF Foundation. Tony happens to be the secretary, so we've got 2 CDXC committee members in the room. So that's a bit about me. Why contesting? Apart from, as I say, working countries, I wanted to improve my station performance and reliability to start with. I wanted to boost my DXCC scores quickly. When I was working, I didn't actually have a lot of time to play radio. I was quite a busy chap flying around the countryside. And I found that by doing contests on a particular band, I could increase my country score. Meet lots of QSOs in a short time. Learn about propagation, antennas and radio. Is your radio any good or not? I guess some of you are finding a bit about that on VHF at the moment with close channel interference. How's your antenna working? There is a competitive spirit amongst people who contest. You know, how did I do last time? Can I beat myself? Can I beat the guy down the road? There's an element of competition to it. It does get you involved in the wider HF radio community. Your call sign gets known, you get known if you go to meetings. And also it gives you some wallpaper to stick on the wall. That's probably one of the certificates I'm most proud of from here, and that's for 160 metres for a CW contest that I was first in England. Now I haven't got any room for 160 metre antennas, so I just had to bodge something up, so I was quite pleased about that. So, about Wiltshire, started in the 90s, got my DXCC score up, got more serious from about the mid-2000s. I found after a couple of goes that multi-band entries and using high power was quite difficult. Not that I was causing QRM to my neighbours, although there's always a risk of that, but there's more competition. There are still quite a few big stations in England, you're not going to worry about Wales and Scotland and Northern Ireland because they're in a different country for contests. You've only got to worry about people in England. But there are still one or two guys with some big stations, with several towers, G3TXF, G3BJ, M6T, those kind of guys. So they've got big antennas on every band. So you're not going to win anything. So I decided to have a bit of a think about it. Use of temporary antennas for the weekend. My wife's not very keen on tripping over radials when she's hanging the washing out, so I can't leave things like verticals with radials down. Having a contest call, I think, does help, particularly with the Americans.
Sometimes.
They like contest calls. I don't know why, but they seem to like it.
The number of Americans that still got hands. What's the rest of you called? What's the rest of you called?
Probably the deaf ones.
Yeah.
So for me, single band entries have been much more successful. It's also important to define what winning means to you. It might mean just having 100 QSOs. You know, if you're running QRP or something like that, it might mean, you know, if I come in the top 10, I'm quite happy. So it's important to decide what's important to you. I just found that picture actually when I was looking through the pictures, because that was the club contest effort one time when the foot and mouth was about 2001, yeah, and we did that looks like 2 meters, and I think we came second in that.
Was that the time when you interfered with the church?
It was, yeah, it was. Oh, the club did. I wasn't operating. Yeah, so the Methodist chapel is about 50 metres from my house. My wife happens to attend, and it had an old valve Hammond organ in there. And they were all sat there quietly waiting for the opening hymn, and CQ Contest comes out the organ. and so my wife puts her hand up and says to the minister, "I know what that is. Give me 2 minutes and I'll get it stopped." So for an hour we had to run on low power. I think we were running about 1 kilowatt or something on 2 meters. You can cut that out, James. Just a bit about what my setup in Wiltshire has been. Over the years, I've been a Yaesu man basically in England. I started with an FT102 in person, which is one of the old Yaesu rigs with the two valves in the PA. Runs about 150 watts. I then changed to an FT1000MP, which I kept for years and years, only sold a couple of years ago. And then moved to a 1000MP Mark V 200 watt version. And more recently, been using an FTDX 5000 and a K2 plus a quadrilinear. So that's what I currently use here. I've got a small white garden. Some of you have been to my house. It's not that big. It's about 30 feet long and about 25 feet wide. It's not particularly big. I have managed to, over the years, sneak an HF beam up in the garden. Long story about how that happened. It gradually got taller and taller and bigger over the years. So it's been up there now for about 17 years without planning permission. But none of the neighbours have complained, so as far as I'm concerned, it's staying there. It's now a heavy duty tenor mast, and it's a 3-element step IR beam, which has been up since about 2007, I think. Maximum height is 40 feet. The other antenna which I keep up permanently is a 40 metre vertically polarised loop, which I use mainly for DXing on 40 metres. It's effectively two-phased verticals with two radials underneath it. I also put temporary verticals up for 40 metres and for 80 metres, and a temporary verted L for 160 when I need to. I'm very lucky. When I bought the house, I wasn't actually doing radio in person. You know, I had a busy job, young kids, but it happens that where I live in Purton's on a ridge, and it's got a really good takeoff to the States and to Asia and Australasia. And actually, I don't need to wind the mast up at 25 feet. I can still be a very strong signal on the west coast of the States, just with 100 watts. So I'm quite lucky, but it wasn't deliberate. Here's a picture of my shack, as it was a couple of years ago, I think, with an DX5000 and a 1000. So I've sold the 1000 now, little K2 sat on top there if you can see it as well. So that's the shack, and that's the beam in the back garden. My back garden is actually higher than the house, so I gain about 10 feet to start with. So I suppose the effective height of the antenna when it's wound up is about 50 feet.
Is that what, 10, 15, 20 metres the beams?
And the walk bands in between. It's a stepper, so it'll go 20, 17, 15, 12 and 10 and 6. The elements, it's motorised, so the elements go in and out. So here's how I've done from here. And you can see, first of all, you'll notice that they're pretty well all single band entries. I think they all are. And you'll see back in 2002, 2008, sunspot cycle was quite high, so I tended to stick with 15 metres. Then things dropped off and I went down to 7 megs. Bit of RITI in there. Bit of CW. I'll talk about CW in a minute, because I think that's quite important. And you see in there, there's a couple of record scores for England, and one at least. I got a second place in Europe, which I was quite pleased about. And even this year, I did the RITI contest and the SSB contest for iTubes, 20 metres, because the antenna works best on 20 metres, and that's where the activity is at the moment. But not many high power entries you'll see there. There was at the beginning, and you'll see a couple of number 2 positions as well. 2020 got lost because I got stuck in France because of COVID, so I didn't operate anything for me. So I think what I'm saying is it can be done if you've got the the incentive to do it. If you want to do it, you can. It's not that difficult. So that's a bit about Perton. So why France? And I'm going to talk about from a radio point of view. I'm not going to talk about living there and the culture and why the girls are much prettier, but they are. And they don't wear as much on the beach, but that's another story. Property and land is cheaper, as you can see. Oh, that's not something that was for sale. That happens to be a chateau, not just up the road from where we live. But the plots are bigger, houses are a lot cheaper. They're probably a quarter of the price that they are in the UK, that sort of difference. And if you buy in the country, the neighbours are further away. My neighbour is a kilometre away, my nearest neighbour in France. The planning rules are easier. An example of that is you can put something up that's 8 metres high permanently without planning permission. And you can put other things up which are much higher than that, provided you can drop them to 8 metres. So my Versa tower doesn't require planning permission because I can drop it to 8 metres, which is incredible really, isn't it? Propagation's better because you're further south. The MUF is high, we'll talk about that a little bit. It's got good UK travel links as well, or it did have, until COVID started. It's quite easy to drive there or to fly there. The weather is better, which means you can your arrows don't rot as quickly. It has its drawbacks. It means in summer you can't work on them. It's too bloody hot. I'll tell you, and the wine food is not bad either. So finding a French QTH, quite difficult. We wanted to go sort of south of the Loire because that's where the weather changes, becomes better. And we looked at 3 different areas. We looked at the Charente-Maritime, we looked at the area around the Dordogne and south of the Dordogne. We looked at the Languedoc, which is more towards the southeast of France. The Languedoc we decided was too hot. When we were looking at houses, it was the end of July, and I'm glad we went then because it was 40 degrees in the Languedoc and got this hot wind blowing on your face, and we decided that was too hot for us actually. We looked at 35 houses. We told these estate agents we didn't want a project where we had to rebuild it and knock walls down. We just wanted something we could move into. But they showed us some real rubbish. We looked at 35 houses and we nearly gave up. And we bought the last one we saw, literally the last one we saw, which is in a department called the Los Aigrons, Department 47, which is just south of the Dordogne. We're about 45 minutes south of a town called Bergerac, which some of you will have heard of, and some of you remember the detective TV series, no doubt. And what we ended up with was an old farmhouse built in 1780 with a reasonable sized garden, 5,500 square metres of garden. Everything's in square metres in France and in Europe generally, so don't ask me how many acres that is because I don't know. And it's surrounded by fields, of course, it's an old farmhouse. And the nearest neighbour's a kilometre away. And there's a picture of the house, if it's coming out very clear. That's taken by my mother-in-law. You can tell it's taken by my mother-in-law because she left her feet in the picture. So we found somewhere in the end. And this is where it is. It's in southwest France. It's at the end of the line there. It's between Bordeaux and Toulouse, really, for those of you that know much of the geography. This is the Spanish border down here. It's about 3 hours drive to Spain. It's about 2 hours drive to the coast. It's about a 7-hour drive to Caen, which is where we get the boat to come back to Portsmouth. It's about a 400-mile drive to get back. So how I made a start, I started in the dining room when we moved into the house, just using G3YBY, which I say you can do that for 3 months. I took a little FT897 with me and bought one of these big IR verticals. I got F5 VKT in November 2005, and then I moved to a first floor bed. I got kicked out of the dining room basically by the house manager, so I was able to use a small bedroom.
Did you have to pass exams again here to get French call sign?
No,
just
under
just apply
under CEPT. The reason I've got F5V, the F5V was for foreigners. At that time, F5V was for foreign European nationals. They then changed it to F4V. But since Brexit, if you're a UK national and you want to get a French licence, then they would now issue you with F5W to denote you're a non-European. You can still get them because this CEPT is nothing to do with the EU. It's a postal telecommunications agreement of not just European countries, but the US and lots of other countries as well. So all I needed to do was provide them with a copy of my licence, birth certificate, passport, that kind of thing. And in those days, you had to pay for it. You stopped paying for French licences about 5 years ago, I think.
But you have to be a resident or not?
Yeah. Yeah, you have to prove you're a resident. You know, electricity bill or something like that. Yeah. Because what they say is if you're there for less than 3 months, you use your home call with an F stroke in front of it, which is fine. I was surprised how long I used it. Certainly when I came to look at the timing, I actually was stuck in the bedroom for 5 years. I bought a Versatile on eBay from Marlborough, of all places, from a silent key. So I had a problem with getting it to France. And I don't know if you remember, you remember loading it in Marlborough onto the back of a lorry. I got it as shipped as a part load. I think I paid 200 quid for the tower and 300 quid to shift it.
You didn't have the ground post, did you?
Didn't have the ground post. I had to buy a new ground post, and that cost me 500 quid.
I remember getting that.
Yeah, that came from Gloucester. But I'm not sure you can get them now. But
Can you not buy them in France? Are they not?
not Versatiles now, no. But this one just came up, for 200 quid, for a 60-foot tower. But so in the end, it probably cost £1,000, plus a lot of sweat, which we'll talk about in a minute. But I had to put a plan together. Where do I put the shack and the antennas? I need to think about it if I want to do it, seriously. So that's the setup in the dining room. Not sure, can you see that?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a little FT897, little laptop computer, and the controller for the Sapphire vertical. And there's the Sapphire vertical stuck in the garden. put about 8 radials down on it, and it seemed to work all right. For those of you that don't know, it's got a little motor at the bottom, and it pushes the copper beryllium strip up and down. So you have to feed it with coax and the control cable. And that stayed there for 3 or 4 years, I think, till X-Wile got fed up with it.
How many radios did you have down for that? Did you get away with?
It works with 8, but when I increased it to 32, it works a lot better, particularly on 40 metres. So let's talk about antennas. So we put the VOACAP in the garden in 2007, dug a hole 32 degrees C. I did have a bit of help with that, I'll talk about that in a minute. And I put a Cushcraft A3S on it, which I inherited from a silent key up in Normandy. Hung an 80 metre inverted V dipole. I had the 40 metre vertical still, of course. I then fed LDF 450 from the shack to a 6-pack antenna switch at the base of the tower. 2 runs of LDF 450 to reduce the loss. Still use the snap IR vertical. And there's the hole we dug for the tower. When I say we, I did have a bit of help. You might recognise this guy, although he's sort of buried in there. That's Tony. And you can see how deep the hole had to be. 2 metres, I think it was.
You use the ploy. I don't really know how to dig a hole and put this up. Show me.
But it was hard work.
It was hard work, yeah.
And we actually put a gazebo over us to keep the sun off. Yeah, Tony's in the shadow there because he nearly disappeared actually.
Did you do the whole thing by hand?
Yeah.
Just a shovel, no all the bits.
Picks and shovel.
Needed a pick, yeah.
So Tony dug for 10 minutes, then I do 10 minutes, and he did. Yeah, we were knackered. And there's the X-Wile towing the tower out of the barn, using a little sit-on tractor that I had, and just rolled it on wooden logs, and that works very well. It's amazing how you'd think you'd never move a heavy tower like that. Just put it on some log rollers and it moves.
My experience with the electricity board moving poles and that was very useful.
Yeah. So Janet helped me put it in place, and there it is, in all its glory, up without any antennas up. And there it is with the A3S on. I think it's about half up there, just on the edge of the drive. If I had my time again, I wouldn't have put it there. I'd have put it somewhere else. I'll explain about that in a minute. So that's the first sort of round of antenna work that I did. It worked, but could do better. So I changed the beam in 2009 to a 4LE stepper, and that's a major change. But this is a monster antenna. It's got a 36-foot boom, but it's certainly a pilot buster. And in contests, it really gets you pulled in the contacts. I actually bought a field next to the garden from the farmer. I found out he was retiring, and he sold me the field just alongside the drive in 2010, which is where I put the tower if I'd have known I could have got that land. So I moved the 40 metre vertical into the field and put loads more radial, put about 60 radials. And I actually, by that time, had acquired a trailer tower from a silent key in Normandy, which we eventually got towed down. That's another story. And so there's the 4LE step. It works on 6 metres as well. But certainly on 15 and 20, that is a pilot buster. There's the trailer tower in the field, and you can't see my neighbours, can you? Because there ain't any. You can see the sort of takeoff, and that's what I used for quite a while. That's just some more views of the step IR vertical. This is towards the southeast, I think, or east and southeast, and that's the tower lowered with the 4LE stepper on it. You can see it's quite a big beast. Wouldn't get away with that in England, would you? Unless you were. But it works. I was talking about the weather being hot in the summer. We typically up to recent years have spent summers in France and winters in the UK, partly because it costs a fortune to heat their house in France, even though it's insulated and got double glazing. It's a big house to heat, but it's hot in the summer, and it is quite hard work doing antenna work in the blazing sun. So I bought this field, but for quite a few years, other than 40 metre vertical and temporary antennas on the trailer tower, didn't really do much with it. And this is where COVID did me a favour, because I got stuck in March 2020, and I just said to myself, bugger it, I'm just going to put these antennas up that I've been planning for a long time. So I put a 40 metre 4-square up. That's 4 verticals, 4 quarter-wave verticals, each with 32 radials underneath. I'll properly lid out with a control box in the middle. Again, fed with LDF 450, because this 4-square is about 120 metres from where my shack is. So I didn't want the loss. I didn't want to gain the gain from the antenna and then lose it all in the coax. A bit of a waste of time. But to put that up properly and install, put the radials down, probably took me the best part of 3 weeks, 8 hours a day for 3 weeks. And I did it in April before it got too hot, because I'd learnt my lesson.
How far apart are the 4 verticals?
A quarter wave, fairly.
Apart.
Quarter wave apart. Yeah, so 10 metres apart. And I also put an 80 metre vertical up, again using an 18 metre spider pole. And I put 50 radials down on that, 50 full-size quarter-wave radials on 80 metres. Because I've got that's why I bought the field.
How many metres of wire altogether for all that lot?
I've probably used so far about 4 kilometres of wire. I need to get some more for 160.
Shortage of fences around this area.
And there's the 4-square up with me saying, thank God I've done it. But it was hard work to put that up. And there's the 80 metre vertical. And I don't know if you can see from where you're at, but that's the 4-square in the background. So this is the field. This is at the end of the field that I bought. So the border is where that tall grass starts. It's about 80 metres by about 50 metres. So you see there's a big gap in the middle between the 80 metre vertical and the 4-square, and we'll come on to what's good. There's something else going in there, as you might guess. So it looks like the same view of the 40 metre one. It's not quite the same place, but that's the 80 metre vertical. And that's another view of the 4-square, looking towards the northeast. And the land's dropping away and then it climbs up again, just slightly higher than where I am, not much.
So how far from the 80 metre to your shack? Probably
About 100 metres.
100 metres.
Yeah. But they all go back to the switch box. The 80 metre one I've just fed with Westflex 103, back to the 6-pack, and then it's LDF 450, because the loss is less on 80 metres. And that's one taken sort of at sunset of all the antennas. So you can see the 4-square in the foreground. That's the 80 metre one. You can see the beam back towards the house in the background.
How much time do you spend cutting the grass?
Too much is the answer. I have to cut it once a week. Grows like buggery from the middle of February. Guess when I'm going back? Seriously, you have to have a sit on it. You'd never do it with a push loader. You have to have a sit on tractor to do it. But it cuts the field as well. I can do the field in about 3 hours, and I can do the garden in about 3 hours, so about 6 hours once a week. Decided to build a new shack in 2011. We had a cellar which wasn't really being used, so my wife and I decided to split it into 3 rooms, put 2 partitions up and tile the floor. The original intention was that room on one side would be my operating shack, the room on the other side would be my workshop, and the room in the middle we would just use for storing summer furniture in the winter. It didn't work out like that, because when my wife saw it built, she decided she was having the workshop. So the shack and workshop.
It's not a total underground, isn't one side?
It's part of the underground, yeah. One of my English neighbours happened to be a carpenter, and he built some heavy duty benches for me, and they need to be heavy duty because some of the linears are bloody heavy. I ran a new 3-phase supply down there with storm protection. We get a lot of thunderstorms in the summer, and people do get their internet routers, printers, TVs damaged, so you need some protection. It's got a separate entrance from the house, so the beauty of it is I can operate, make as much row as I want, shout as loud as I want, and it doesn't bother. I started with the FT1000 MPs, and I bought an ACOM linear. I got to know one of the English local amateurs, a guy called Dennis, F5VHY, used to be a G3, very experienced DXer and contester, and he'd been using FT1000Ps, and he got an ACOM 1000 linear, so I took his advice and got those. But one of the other things he did, he bullied me into learning CW again. I mentioned to you that when I was 14, 15, my father taught me CW on the organ. As soon as I got a licence, I didn't use CW at all. And I hadn't used it from 1969 till about 2006. And then got to know Dennis, and he bullied me really into coming on C. Not a real amateur if you don't use CW, you know. Oh boy, you must do CW in contests. And I thought, right, I'll take you up on that challenge. And gradually I got back into it. And I did cheat to start with. I used Morse readers and things like that. But once you start, you've got to recognise your call sign and recognise the serial number, and then you get into it. And I was quite happy. About 10 years later, I actually beat Dennis in a CW contest. So I was quite pleased about that. But I think he's actually quite pleased that he got me to do it. So here's the building work going on. Here's one of the block partitions we put in to the cellar. Here's the floor being laid and being replastered. And this is the bench. You can see part of the bench. I think the legs came from B&Q. But that is really, I can actually stand on that. So my neighbour did a good job of putting that in. Here's some pictures of what it looked like. Here's what it looks like at 3 o'clock in the morning. Well, I'm not really awake doing contests. And I just started with one radio, FT1000 and a linear. And then a year later, it sort of got expanded a bit. So you can see, I think that's the FT5000 there with an ACOM 2000, which is an automatic band switching linear, and a 1000 MP in the ACOM 2000. And here's the other FT1000. I've got rid of the one FT1000s now. And that's just one corner of the shack. The other end of the same bench I use as a workshop soldering station. On the other side I've got it as an office desk. So what radios? Well, I started off with the 1000 MP fully loaded, and then I started hauling my FTDX 5000 back into. Well, they're bloody heavy. I don't know if you've picked up an FT5000, but they are quite heavy. And I actually got a KX3 second hand, and they're actually quite a good little radio. We feed those into a linear. I've actually got the matching Elecraft 100 watt linear, and then feed that into an ACOM. You can run a kilowatt with a KX3, and they actually, the receivers stand up quite well in contesting.
What is your power limit in France?
500 watts.
Said with the smirk.
Now I mentioned that I've always been a Yaesu guy for 30 years, and then these IC7300s came out, and I was intrigued by them. Really had to have one, and I started using it. I used it in a couple of contests, and I was really impressed with how well it performed. Superb filtering, really, for what the radio is. My opinion is that I come underpriced them. Yeah, that's to our advantage. And I was so impressed with it that I actually bought its big brother, which is a 7610, which I picked up second hand from a guy near Reading actually. So I've gone over to Icon in France, and I'm still using the 7610, and I find that is a superb radio, and it's exactly the same architecture as the Elecraft K4, which is twice the price. So for God's sake, don't buy a K4. I don't know what I'm going to do next. I'll probably wait for Icon to bring something else out, but the 7610 has got nice RF filter on the front end, which is better than the 7300. It's got a better analog to digital converter in it. So it is slightly better, slightly less noisy than the 7300, which I've still got, by the way. And I have those side by side in the shack now. So Yaesu's lost the plot as far as I'm concerned. I don't like the look of the new FT101. Just don't like it. Just don't like the look of it.
You've not considered remote working? Yeah?
Can't do it in France. Not allowed.
No, but you're not allowed to access your
French station from
here.
No.
Not allowed.
Not allowed.
Oh.
No. So I'd love to do it. What contest and what? So let's get back to contesting now. What contest and what section? I find all band contests actually more fun than single. The only benefit of a single band contest, if you do 20 metres, you can have a good night's sleep. All bands you can't. But I find it more fun seeing how the propagation changes. Maybe working the same guys on different bands. The other thing I've got to think about in France, French contests are very competitive. They're more competitive than guys over here, I think. If they do amateur radio, they do it seriously. I've been in a few French hams shacks, and they're all very well appointed, all got big linears, all got big antennas. So if they get into it, they really mean it. So I had to think very carefully about what to do. So I always spent quite a lot of time looking at the results of the contest last year. So what did they do? How can I compete? What's the best section? And the debate really, if you're going to do all bands, it's really, do you do assisted or unassisted? That's the debate really. And what are conditions likely to be like? Should you think about, and what am I best set up for? You know, I know my antennas maybe work better on some bands than others. Some antennas are actually very good DX antennas, and not necessarily the best contest antennas. I'll talk about that in a minute. And how long can I operate? As I get older, I find I can't operate for as long. After about 36 hours, I'm done for. So I've really got to. I used to be able to do 46, and can I wake? And can I get up? And certainly on a Sunday, if you go to bed, at midnight on a Saturday night, and you've already done, 20 hours, do you actually wake up the 4 hours later you thought you were going to do to work the US on 40 metres? Maybe not. Contest calls. I said I think they do make a difference, particularly on CW and RTTY. In the early days in France, I did quite a lot of RTTY, and I had a couple of French amateurs turn up on my drive one day, and the excuse was, we really want to see how you use wind testing because we can't get it to work. And I kept saying, well, it's a French, it's a French program written by a French guy. And what they really wanted to do is find out where my 10 kilowatt linear was, which I didn't have. But that's what they really wanted to know about. The thing about your contest call, you must make sure it's in something called Super Chat Partial on the HF bands. It's a guy in America who runs this database of people who are in contests, and most contest programs these days will look it up for you almost automatically. If you're not in there, people think they've misread it. So you must make sure if you get a contest call and it's a new one, that it's in Super Chat Partial. In France, I have to reapply for my contest call every 6 months. I have to fill in a form, and I have to state which 15 days in that 6 months I'm going to operate in the contest. I have to then include with the form a copy of my licence, a copy of my HAREC certificate, a copy of my passport. That's it. It used to be some money as well, but no money in these days. And that lasts for 6 months, and it can't overlap. So you've got to get the dates when you apply to make sure, even though you can only use it for the dates that you specify. And here's the letter. This is what it looks like. There's the dates. The actual licence is for 6 months, so it can't overlap those 6 months. And I know people have had them refused because there's been a day difference. Typical French bureaucracy. And I've said to the president of RAF a couple of times, the French Radio Society, why can't we have it for 2 years? Why do we have to bugger around like this? And you just go, Gallic shrug and all that.
And do you have to operate on those 15 days?
No.
No, you don't have to.
No.
Right.
In fact, what I do and what other people do, you put a dummy contest in to get the timing right, so it actually expires before, 2 weeks before G3YBY starts, so you can get the next one to work right. So you've got to remember to do it. I have forgotten a couple of times, and that buggers it up. And you don't need, unlike here, you don't need to qualify to get it. You just apply. Whereas if you remember here, you have to get 20% of the winning score, or so many points over 5 years, I think it is now. And somebody else can pick it up. If you don't grab it, don't use it, which is why I didn't pick one up straight away, because I wanted one that was good in CW, that was short in CW. And I managed to pick TM5T up, but it had been used before, about 3 years before, I think. And I had to get Club Log to change it all. But worth doing, I think. I mean, TM5T in CW is the fastest call time you can get in France, if you think about it. TM5E, I suppose, would be quicker. Talk about propagation differences. And I noticed this when I first moved from Warrington to Wiltshire, that the further south you go, the better the propagation. My French QTH is exactly, as the crow flies, 500 miles south of Perth, slightly southeast of Perth actually, but it's 500 miles further south. The NUF is consistently, whenever I look at it, 2 megahertz higher. So that means the bands stay open longer. And particularly during contests, 15 metres and 20 metres stay open to the west coast US much longer in the evenings. So even in the winter, I can work stationed on the west coast of the States at 10 o'clock at night, whereas I know over here the band would be dead and shut. By the same token, 40 metres stays open to the US longer after dawn, sometimes 3 hours. So it can be 11 o'clock in the morning and it's been daylight for 3 hours. I'm still working American stations. And I verified this with Ron, G3YBY, who used to run Vine antennas. Some of you may remember Ron. He actually has got a little house not far from me in France. But when he was back in the UK one time, he's got a 3-element 40-metre beam up at 80 feet. And he said, and he rang me, he said, I was listening to you in the contest at the weekend, and you were working American stations that I couldn't hear. And that was just on a single vertical at that time. It's purely because of propagation. There are some downsides. 80 metres is definitely noisier, particularly in summer. It's very noisy in summer down there because of sun noise. I mentioned that doing contests actually sort of opens other doors before it gets you involved in other things. The French noticed that I was doing a few things. The locals noticed my call sign coming up. I actually joined the Bordeaux DX group, which meets about once every 3 months in where it says in Bordeaux. And there's also a contest station just outside Bordeaux. And they invited me to join the TM0HQ contest team. This is for the IARU contest in July each year. And part of that contest is that the national societies have contest stations, and they all compete with each other around the world, the headquarters stations. And these guys asked me to go and operate at TM0 HQ. They wanted me in particular initially to work 40 metre SSB, because when I first got involved with them, we didn't have above 7.1, and the Americans were split. And so they wanted somebody who could speak decent Americanese to do that, because they were struggling with the American accent. So that's what I did. And I actually did it for 6 years, not every year, but most years. I stopped in 2014. I'll tell you about that in a minute. And we actually won it. Their key competitors were the Germans, who they really wanted to beat with a vengeance, and you can imagine that. So they were very keen to beat the German headquarters station, and they did it for the first time in 2012 when I helped operate. I think I did mainly 40 metre SSB, and again the target was a QSO a minute basically. And they won it again in 2014 when I was involved. And they've won it 4 times since then. I haven't been involved since 2014. There's some pictures of TM0 HQ. The red t-shirts, that's I think the first time I operated. I'm the guy third in the middle on the row standing up. And in the blue, I'm there again a couple of years later, but you can see the effect of French bread and cheese and wine, I think, on a couple of the guys there. So yeah, good fun. You can see they've got a barbecue there with the club call sign on the barbecue, on the permanent barbecue. Dennis is there.
Yeah, the tall one. See
Yeah,
Dennis,
that's Dennis F5VHY.
Yeah, and on the
G3YBY.
left hand end back
and up there, yeah. And that's just a picture of me operating. So, yeah, I opened a few doors. This was another door that opened for me by coming down and contesting. When I did TM0 HQ, I came back to one of the RSGB conventions and was very quickly tackled by G3YBY, who runs the GR2 HQ contest team over here. He said, "What's going on with you? Why are you operating for the French guys? Why aren't you operating for the UK team?" And I said to him, "Well, you never asked me." The French guys asked me. So that's quite interesting. But again, my contest activity led to an invite from Neville, G3NUG, who ran the 5-star DX Association. I'm not going to talk too much about T32 because I know Tony gave you a presentation of that, but spent the early month on Christmas Island. Great fun. It was a world record breaking the expedition. What's it got to do with contesting? Well, the contesters, people who were very active in contesting, there was a team of 38 people altogether. Not a lot of people stayed for the month. Tony and I did, but other people didn't. The contesters had the higher QSOs, so contesters make good DXs and good DXpedition operators as well. And there's an example of that. Sorry about this, Tony.
That's okay.
I had just over 9,000 QSOs of that 213,000. It was the 6th highest of the 38. And Tony was right behind me with the 7th. It was a competition within the competition, really. It was, wasn't it? About who could get the highest number of QSOs.
How many did the highest one get?
11, was it?
11, because they were going right to the bitter end. We were taking stuff down.
We had to drag
We
one
were
down.
literally taking stuff down. And we actually said, we're taking that antenna down. There's still money going to the gate.
Dragging them off the radio.
Yeah, so here's a couple of pictures of T32C. That's me before the French wine belly, but wearing the TM0 HQ t-shirt just to wind some of the GR2 HQ guys up. We did a contest while we were there. We did the Wiltshire and the DX contest, which of course we won.
By a long chalk.
And set a new world record for that contest. I actually also was quite lucky to have one of my photographs published on the front page of Radcom, and I actually got paid for that. 50 quid, I think. So if you've got any decent photographs of amateur radio activity, send them to Radcom. They might pay you for them. So let's go back to how I've done so far. So I think it starts down here, 2008. A couple of number 2s in France. Well, that gives you incentive to improve, doesn't it? So you can see that quite a lot of number 1s. There are a few number 2s, but mainly all multi-band. A couple of IOTAs in there. Came second in the world once in one of the IOTA sections, or there's too many sections in that contest. So that's from 2008 to 2015. Let's go back the other way. And there's another page, of course. So, yeah, I've been pretty active. I won't go through all those results one by one. There's a few, either number 2 or number 1 is one, number 3 there. And recently, CQ Worldwide and WPX have introduced a classic section, which is 24 hours unassisted. I've done some of those and got a new France record for those. So yeah, you can say I've been pretty active in content. I didn't realise how much I'd done till I put this all together. Let's just talk a bit about post the contest. There's something called 3830 scores. I think it's quite interesting to put your score on there for the section you're in, because lots of other people do that now, and you can see how well you've done. You can actually report your score as you're actually running live in the contest these days with some contest loggers, and I've started doing that as well. But I think reporting your score is quite good. You can see how you did. The logging software only does basic analysis of your performance. There's better ways of doing it. And you can look at other people's logs as well, because they're in the public domain. So you can see, when did they change bands? How long did they operate for? How fast was it going? I use something called SH5, it's written by a Russian guy, which enables you to do a lot more contest analysis. I'll try and make a list of issues and improvements that need to do for next time. And the other thing you should do, of course, report to your family that you're alive and well and you haven't dropped dead at the English
I'm waking up for 2 days.
Here's an example that you probably can't see that very clearly, of SH5, but that's, you can look at rate per hour per band. You get some nice graphics with it, and look at your top 10 countries. This is CQ Worldwide that I did in November. You look at your rates. So that told me that there was a 10-minute period where I was running at 192 an hour, and over there was a 2-hour period where I run at 140 an hour. So it just tells you what your rates are like. Also tells you how your beam headings are, and how many stations you work with beam heading. Not surprisingly, these beam headings here are all US countries. That told me when I put that Foursquare up for 40 metres, that 50% of my QSOs on 40 metres were with the States, which I'd never had before. So what about the future? Well, of course, I need to put a 160 metre vertical up in between the 80 metre and the Foursquare for 40. The 80 metre one I'm going to make into 2 phase verticals and phase them together and switch them. I've just about got room to do that. I think I need to put another antenna up for 40. The Foursquare works great, but its angle of radiation is actually probably too low for putting big signal into Eastern Europe and the east coast of the States. And I'm thinking of putting a 2-element Moxon up for 40 on the trailer tower, because that's got a very good front to back ratio for not too much wind load. And I'd really like to put a 5-element for 20 up at 85 feet. The reason for that is I've modelled my terrain using some software called HFTA, and it tells me that I've got a little hill which only goes 6 metres higher than where I am, but to get over that fully to the west coast, I need to have my antenna at 85 feet, not at 65. So I'd really like to get something higher and bigger for 20. Whether I'll be able to do that or not, I don't know. Ron, G3YBY, has given me a 7-element LFA for 6 metres, which I need to put up. And I want to automate the antenna switching by band. I haven't done that yet. So when you're knackered at 3 o'clock in the morning, you forget to switch it. You're on the wrong antenna, and risk blowing it up. I found that I currently run on CW at about 28 words a minute, and I think that works quite well, and that's why my rates and the QSO rates are going up. I think the optimum is about 30, so I've just got a bit more practice to do to get up to 30 words a minute.
No receiver antennas?
Probably a couple of beverages for.
Yeah, I was thinking.
I need to get a better chair. I get fit. I'm not sure which it is. Occasionally I get sort of achy muscles around my shoulders and lower back. I've tried a couple of different chairs, nice leather office chairs, or I need to get fitter, one of the two. And in the future, you know, if I can't stay up for 48 hours, do I need to think about single bands or all bands, or do I need to call a friend and say, do you want to come and do a bit of operation, do a multi-single or a multi-two? Just a few things on hints and tips, just some information really. There's a site that's got 30 contesting tips that I think is quite good. I'm going to give you these, you might want to put these on the website or something. There's the link there, it's an American link. That's quite good. There's some planning tools for propagation in particular. Solar ham you probably know. There's a VOACAP online for ham radio now, which will you plug your power in your aerial in, and it'll tell you how your signal is going to be around the world at any particular time, or you can do it point to point. There's some real-time monitoring tools about these days. PSK reports you probably know about from FT8 and so on. DX maps, a couple more there. There's a do's and don'ts PDF as well by the Florida contest group, which is quite good. What to do and what not to do. And there's a contest university as well. There's some good presentations on their website. If you really want to get into stuck it, I think they've got some YouTubes. And there are a couple of UK reflector groups as well for contests. There's one for HF and one for VHF, which I'm sure some of you know about. I've got 4 actually, which I think are from experience. Check everything's working.
Everything.
Everything.
Absolutely everything.
And I've come a couple of times because there's been a piece of coax that's got a dodgy connection on it, and 2 hours into the contest I'm thinking, why is the linear keep tripping? So check everything, I would say at least a week before. Check your antenna, put your antenna analyzer on, whack some power up the coax, make sure it's all working, have a few QSOs, make sure your rig's working, make sure your software's working, we got the latest version, update the country files, update super check partial, make sure your antenna switching is working. That's quite important. Choose the right section, and it's about doing the research. How's the guy down the road done? You know, and Dennis and I have done a bit of coordinating over the years. You know, he'll do unassisted, I'll do assisted, and so on, to make sure we both get a bit more wallpaper. I think learning CW is actually quite important. I want to believe you in 2006 if you'd have said to me, you're going to be winning G3YBY CW for France. I actually enjoy it far more than SSB contests. SSB contests just sound like a load of noise in my ears these days. CW is much easier because the filtering on the radios pulls out the signals much better. You've got a lot more room. You can get 5 or 8 stations in a kilohertz. You can't get 1 station in a kilohertz on SSB. So I would encourage people to have a go at CW contests. No matter how slow you start off, it's good fun. And stay in the chair. I've won quite a lot of contests purely and simply because I operated for longer than the guy who was perhaps just behind me. He may have had more multipliers, he may have had a faster rate, but he didn't stay in the chair long enough.
I think the thing I would add to that is, I'm not as experienced as you, but stay in the chair fine, but give yourself a set time unless it's going well. Give yourself set time, get up and walk around for 5 minutes or so and then down again.
I actually operate standing up sometimes.
Yeah.
I haven't got a desk that goes up and down, but I actually can just operate standing up. So there we go. That's a bit about contesting in France and in Wiltshire. So, one more thing, before anybody's got any question, just just to confirm your rumours, it does actually snow in France.
When was that?
I got stuck for 3 days,
Oh,
couldn't
I
get out.
remember that.
2011. Okay.
We're all green now.
Yeah, thanks for that, Ian. That's excellent.
Yeah, that's, excellent.
As I say, it does become an addiction, unfortunately. Unfortunately. It keeps me out of mischief. Keeps me out of the pub.
One thing I was going to ask you, in the VHF competitions, often you score points number of kilometres, whereas in the HF contest, it never seems to be that way. So it's just purely number of QSOs, multipliers.
Yeah.
It can be,
Kilometres never seem to come into it.
no, because of propagation.
Propagation varies.
It's either countries or zones
Yeah.
or prefixes,
So there are no contests, HF contests, where
not below 6 metres, no. No, it's all about countries, zones. CQYBY is about working zones. You know, there are 40 zones. You need to try and work 40 zones on each band.
Do you consider doing VHF and UHF?
I have done a couple
Yeah.
because the local French Radio Society Association, it's split into departments. Again, they have a national competition where the departments compete against each other, both on HF and on VHF, and then they put it all together into a sort of a departmental championship. And the department I've been in has won it a few times, and the reason they win it, it's a complicated formula, and it's based on the number of amateurs that are in the department, because it's a small department. I think there are only 103 amateurs in the whole department, and it's sort of weighted for them, so they've got a very good chance of winning it. So they've twisted my arm to go on 2 metres a couple of times and do 2 metres, but you have to have 30 QSOs, I think it is, which can be hard going from that part of the world. Well, I did do it 1 year and worked Sicily on Sprady Key on 2 metres, which I'd never done before.
you wear glasses, Ian, with the headphones. After 40 hours, I found
Yeah, I tend to wear earbuds.
it was due.
I just wear earbuds, which you can do on CW because you're not worried about
Yeah.
having a mic. But I also use the Yamaha headset, the CM500, is it? It's much lighter than the Heil. I'm not sure you can get it over here actually.
You can, but it's quite expensive.
But I use the Yamaha CM500 headset, but because Heils are very comfortable. I've got a couple of Heil headsets, so I just keep them in the drawer. I like to get rid of them really. But for CW, the beauty of CW, because you don't need a mic, you can wear very light headphones, you know, Walkman type headphones or even earbuds. So I use
Seems like you've got a lot of equipment you don't use anymore. Really.
No, you're not having
You
it.
need a home for it. There's volunteers in the room.
The equipment he has got that he's got to use for that we can do with is the space.
yeah.
That's a magic bit.
Yeah.
Shame you can't work remote in France.
That's a magic bit.
And
So-
what advice would you give, you know, many people, you've been fortunate that you've been able to go to a location like that and then got the funds to do all the things you've done, which is amazing obviously. But if you haven't got that opportunity and you're stuck in Swindon in an ordinary, you've got 2 neighbours either side.
Well, that's how I am in Burton. Just look at single band, put a competitive antenna up for the weekend. That's what I would do. So it depends how much. A lot of people that I know, certainly in CDXC, put up a pair of phase verticals for 40 metres, because you can just about get that in a standard back garden. Or
It's
in
the
front.
radials that's
Or
the
in
issue.
front.
Get
Yeah.
the radials down.
But radials ideally should be a quarter wave long, but of course as soon as you put them on the floor you detune them anyway. So as long as you can get them, even if they're only 1/8 of a wavelength, it doesn't matter. It's the earth losses around the area you're trying to reduce.
I mean, that's all I do in the winter is usually put the top band or 80 metre vertical or inverted Ella,
Yeah.
just for the autumn and the winter.
Yeah, concentrate on a single band. I mean, if you get all the other options, of course, to go portable. You know, because it's not just location on top hill are good for VHF, they're good for HF. You get the land dropping away very close to you. I mean, we've operated HF from Barbary in years gone by, and that worked very well.
Yeah, I've worked QRP up there from Barbary on fairly compromised antennas, and I've got all over the place.
One of the Bristol clubs does very well on HF field day, and they just use wire antennas, but they're up on up near Lansdowne, up on near the Bath racecourse at Bath, and the ground slopes toward the States, and they get on that, and it gives them terrific take off that way.
So yeah, the thing. I mean, a lot of people go away for the weekend, rent a cottage in one of the islands off Scotland somewhere, and things like that.
Not Rockall.
Not Rockall. But yeah, just think about what you want to operate on.
It's quite interesting to see what you can do from home though. It's,
I mean, it's partly to do with your operating style and the skill that you build up. It's not all about your antenna. It does help. If you're one of the strongest signals on the band, it helps, but you don't have to be.
That's the thing I noticed when he was talking about so many an hour. That's fine if you've got a station big enough to attract that sort of attention, but most of us are not likely to have that unless we hit a good streak somewhere. So you've then got the strategy of how long do you spend calling out, do you search your patterns. It's the same with the VHF ones, it's sorting that balance out, and that only comes with listening to what the propagation's doing.
One of the benefits of CW is you don't have to be as big a CW signal. If you're S7 and you're a good operator, and people can hear that you're running stations steadily without any repeats or anything, they will call you. So that's where CW does have its advantages. And because of the space that a signal takes, with good filtering on radios these days, you very rarely get QRM done CW, whereas sidebands.
Although funnily enough, you'll have found it as well. When you get on the expeditions, you find that they're really good. The expedition CW operators don't narrow the filter right down; they have it wide, and they use their brain to pick the one out. What to me is just I was picking them out. I found that very, very difficult. But you can. If you've got good filters,
So you need to have it wider, because a lot of people call you a frequency anyway.
Do they work split on CW as well, or not?
No,
not on contest.
No.
They do on the expeditions, of course, but not on
But
contest.
you have to on the expeditions, otherwise you never hear anything.
Yeah. But one of the tricks is to call 100 hertz or 150 hertz off the frequency, because otherwise what you find with modern rigs these days, because they're all very accurate frequency, everybody calls you on the same frequency, and you just can't pick anything out. But somebody calls you just off, you can copy them straight away.
That's why you need to have it wide.
So that works
Play
well.
with it. Learn your rig. That's the other thing. Learn your rig.
But yeah, but that if you've got a little 7300, they're great radios for contests, I think. You can't go wrong for a grand or whatever they are. The filtering's very good. You've got to use the RF gain a bit and the attenuator. I mean, on 40 and 20, I don't use the preamps at all on any radio that I've got. And on 40 and 80, I put 6 or 12 dBs of attenuation in, just to take everything down so I can pick out the strongest stations.
What's your view on the assisted and unassisted? Because again, that's another big decision.
I think I prefer to do unassisted. I think being assisted slows you down, because what you're doing is looking at the band map all the time for multipliers. Now, if they're a multiplier, the world and his wife wants to work them. So you've got a massive pilot. Unless you've got a big signal, you're not going to get through the pilot. So it's easier, and it depends on the contest. CQ worldwide is different to WPX. CQ worldwide, you've got to search in pounds for the multipliers more. WPX is a rate contest. It's all about working prefixes. So, to some extent, working a K2 is worth it as much as working, a KL6 or something. WPX, it's just about running as fast as you can, because it's the prefixes that are multipliers.
I do find though that you're at a big disadvantage when you're non-assisted, because you'll be searching for multipliers and you'll hear a pile-up,
And they won't send the call sign.
and
You wouldn't have
either
noticed.
they don't send the call sign, or every time they complete the QSO and go to give their call sign,
Everyone else jumps in. Yeah.
and can take you an hour to get their bloody call sign.
Yeah. But it's also about what's your competition doing.
Mm.
You know, if you see that, because in France, for instance, there's a couple of big contest stations. There's one on the coast of Brittany, right on the cliffs, and they've got stacked beams for 20 and 15. So they've got a 4/4 for 20 and a 5/5 for 15. If they're going to do, high power, and so they use these contest stations for single operator activity, which I think is questionable. So if you know they're going to use it for single operator, and they're going to do assisted, you haven't got a cat and mouse chance. Because they're putting 5 kilowatts into stacked beams. You're not going to. So you've got to look at the category.
And it's amazing that also looking at those scores, how they can vary from year to year.
Yeah.
It seems as well, because you think you need to hit X 100,000 to get number one.
Yeah.
Certainly last year that would have got you to number one, say for example. Whereas this year, well,
Propagation.
completely different.
I mean, there was one year.
So what do you do about that?
I think it was about 3 years ago. It was a WPX contest at the end of May, and the French, the department RAF 47, it's called in France, were invited to a departmental dinner because they were champions of France, and the department I live in doesn't win many things where they're the best in France. So the department government, if you like, invited us all for lunch at the sort of headquarters of the council, which was at lunchtime, and French lunches take a long time. And that was on the Saturday of the contest. So, bloody hell, I'm going to miss half the contest, but really ought to go, because it was a nice lunch. I came back, and about 8 o'clock at night, power went off. We had a power cut. Don't know why. So the power went off for the rest of the night. So I went on again on the Sunday, but I'd lost enthusiasm, didn't think I couldn't do anything. I still came number one, because people in my category hadn't operated. So you can be lucky. It's like over here, I did the RITI contest in September before I went back to France. From here for 20 metres low power. And I think I only did about 6 hours, but it looks as though I'm in that particular section and I'm first in England. It's about picking your section. And if you do QRP, so I know some guys have won it QRP for 20 QSOs, they'll win it. Although it seems to be getting more popular now, QRP. People who have won high power and low power are sort of moving down. Deciding QRP is quite interesting. It's about picking your section, I think, and just deciding where you can be. But some people just do it, say, I got 500 last year, I'll try and get 750 this year. You can be competing against yourself.
Did I do better, and if not, why not? It's worth doing, as it says afterwards, what went right, what went wrong, what could I improve.
And do it before you leave the shack, otherwise you'll forget. Or I try and make notes as I'm going along. But it becomes an addiction. I mean, it's probably got so bad with me that my wife even knows the dates of the contest now. And I'm just wondering is that right? Should she? Oh yeah, she knows the last week in November I'm going to be in France doing CQW.
Well, I must have it's the same in our household, the 2 CQWW sidebound on CW. My wife knows they're my weekends. No matter where else is on, they're my weekends.
It does become a bit of an addiction. That's not why I bought a house in France. Honest.
Excellent.
Excellent.
Yeah,
Very
thanks a
much.
lot.